Hello guys, another Beatles fan here, and today we're going to talk about John Lennon's years of activism, especially 1971 to 73, right? And before we start though, I want to tell you guys this cool story because if you're a Beatles fan, you want to know that it, it's something that changed Lennon's entire life, turned it upside down, and everything that happened from then onward was kind of a consequence of it, really. And that's the story I want to tell you here, right? Before we start, though, three things. Number one, it's extremely hot here in Brazil, so that's why my fan is turned on. That's why the audio quality may be terrible. I'm sorry, but I just can't record this without the fan being on. It's too hot in here. Number two, apparently Danny Lane, Paul's great friend and great partner of the Wings, right, of the Wings era, apparently he is extremely sick in the hospital and he needs money to pay for his hospital bills, which is something that doesn't make any sense to me at least. So please take a look at that, and if you can, do help. We as Beatles fans should do it. Number three, before we start, I haven't done a video in so long, and it's because I didn't have any inspiration. I don't want to record anything, any video, unless I have a story to tell, and that's something I brought today. So everything I'm gonna talk about here comes mainly from the book The Walrus and the Elephants, John Lennon's Year of Revolution by James A. Mitchell. I've read it on my Kindle. This is the Brazilian Kindle edition in Portuguese, right? So the main story I want to tell here again is how Lennon's years of activism really changed his life and turned it upside down. So the Beatles had just broken up, right? And he and Yoko were so keen on just spreading the peace, right? The word of peace. So they did the bed-ins, they sent acorns or something like that to all the world leaders at the time. And John really wanted to change his surroundings. He didn't like to be in England anymore, so that's why he moved to New York. And it was in New York where he found a ton of extremely important people in the civil rights movement and in all the leftist movements, right? All the leftist stuff going around there, which is part of the civil rights movement again, of the weed movement, of the LGBTQI plus movement, which at the time was probably called the gay movement or whatever. So that's the spirit, and John was extremely keen on spreading his word against the Vietnam War, and he loved New York right from the get-go. That is the first thing I noticed about the book, is that how he loved it. He didn't live in the Dakota on those days. He lived in the village. And I don't know New York, I've never been there, but apparently it was an area where John could wander around and go to bookshops and bakeries, everything on foot, and he really wanted to be treated as a normal person. He didn't like to be treated as John Lennon of the Beatles, right? And he kind of had that in New York, so that's why he loved it. And he started doing campaigns and so what for peace. And the major thing that happened in 1971, something that happened around that time, end of 71, beginning of 72, he was in a travel visa, right? So he wasn't there as a resident, which meant that he couldn't do concerts for a profit, right? He couldn't play live, and that was something he really wanted to do. He was really keen to do that. He was enjoying the music, and he was trying to sing songs about peace and about what was going on at the time. So number one, he needed a new band, right? And that's where Elephant's Memory comes in. They were a band based in Village, again in New York, and they were a political band too. They sung about basically every major problem that John also thought was worthy discussing through music, and John loved them, and they were really rock and roll, kind of heavy hitters on that, and they were famous amongst the movement and the little all the people surrounding this um, this this movement, right? I'm sorry about that. I forgot the word I was trying to say here, but anyway, he got together with Elephant's Memory, and he started playing songs. So the first thing he did was play at a concert for John Sinclair. He was a very important weed activist. He wanted weed to be legalized, and he was arrested for possession of 2 joints for more than 1 year. So when John heard about that, and he had all the money, he had all the contacts to make something happen, and the movement knew that. And by the movement, again, I refer to this left-wing civil rights people, right? They knew about that, and he knew that John could do something, so he arranged a concert for John Sinclair. He even wrote a song about it, and Sinclair was released from jail 2 days after John's concert. Even Stevie Wonder came for John's surprise and played on it, so it was a really something that John was really grateful for. And there was also an incident on a prison that I forgot its name, but inmates and police officers were killed, and John also wanted to spread word on police brutality and everything surrounding that, right? So I guess you can see the picture here of what I'm talking about, of John wanting to be this kind of leader, right, for people, and he knew he could be this voice. But then Nixon happened, and this is the main point of the video, about how Nixon was really concerned about national security. And we all know what happened, if you're American. I'm not American, so I started to really understand what happened then when I was reading and also studying this book, right? And he was using the forces and the state machinery to win the re-election. Basically, he wanted a re-election, and he was apparently willing to do anything for it. So, and meanwhile, John was a really powerful voice. He was an ex-Beatle, for crying out loud, and he was with sharing anti-Nixon propaganda, leftist propaganda, communist propaganda, right? So Nixon tried to play that card, right? He knew, and the FBI knew, that something that documents proved later down the line, even after Lennon was killed, that the U.S. government and Nixon at the time really thought that John could turn the tide of the election to McGovern, right? They didn't want that, and they kind of wanted to use everything necessary to stop that. So Nixon really tried to stop with these John Lennon appearances and the politics and all. And that's when everything kind of went downhill for John. Because, number one, Kyoko, who's Yoko's daughter, in her previous marriage, was abducted by her father. and they didn't know where she was. She was somewhere in Texas. And also Nixon wanted to deport John. He wanted John out of the U.S. and that was suspicious, right? And he said, and the government were arguing that it was because John had been arrested in 1968 in England because he had weed with him. And it was the same case where I think Mick Jagger was also arrested, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones too, and George Harrison. George was arrested. And so John started to get stalked, and even Elephant's Memory, the band, they started to notice that there were a couple funny looking guys kind of following them at night, and John could hear something on his phone when he made a phone call. Even Elephant's Memory phones were tapped, and that kind of made John paranoid. And at that time, he didn't know for sure if that was something that he was only imagining, if that was really happening. Of course, later down the line, he knew that, yeah, I'm not paranoid, that's exactly what Nixon did. But that made him concerned, and that kind of that was a break for him. He needed a break after all of this. And besides that, sometime in New York City, the album he released meant to be a journalistic album, an album that would tell the news of what was going on with Angela Davis and Sinclair and Attica prison, which I think is the prison I mentioned earlier. And it just flopped. Critics were harsh, to be honest. I don't like that album. I think it's bad. Although Elephant's Memory is good, but the songs are just not good. John wasn't. He was doing so many cool things around then, but his music wasn't the best, to be honest. I really do believe that, and critics thought so too. So Kyoko plus FBI chasing and trying to deport him and suing, and he having to go to court to explain himself and whatnot, plus sometimes in New York City being a huge flop, made him just kind of give up. And as he couldn't leave the US, because if he left the US and tried to get back, maybe he wouldn't be granted entry, and also he couldn't perform live as he wanted to because he was with a travel visa, right? It wasn't working visa or a resident visa. That kind of killed it for him. And later down the line, right after Nixon won the re-election, he kind of grew tired of it, and Yoko's marriage with him was just in a terrible state. And then they broke up, right? And he spent 1 year with May Pang in Los Angeles in The Lost Weekend. And that's a topic for another video. But anyway, this is the very quick recounting of everything that happened. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It's been a quick video, but all that in mind, let's just picture how the world would be if John hadn't participated in that. Or even better, if Nixon didn't decide to stalk him and go after him for something that clearly he wasn't doing right. He wasn't doing wrong, I'm sorry. John thought that Nixon was after him because of his anti-war messaging, but it wasn't. It was because he was a political enemy, right? Nixon thought he could turn the tide of the election, and he didn't want that. So what would have happened with John if he had just moved on, and if Nixon hadn't done that to him? Would he go on tour with Elephant's Memory and make a a huge tour, America-wide? And would he record more albums? Would he stop with his music right after Walls and Bridges to take care of Sean and his and Yoko's marriage? What could have gone different? Would have John been killed? I mean, if he didn't have that whole era as an activist, I doubt that would have happened. But what about the stalking? What about the media? What part did they play in all of it, right? So that's something we gotta think about. This is a part where I think John kind of redeemed himself. He was not a good human being. From everything I've studied, he transformed himself as a person in an extremely good way. He became better, and of course he had his faults, but at the end of the day he was a human being, and he tried to be better and better every day. And throughout the book we hear how John was loved by everyone around him. He was a really cool guy, a really chill and peaceful man who really had his best intentions in mind throughout this whole journey with Elephant's Memory and with the political side of his career, right? So, and quoting the book, kind of something that they mentioned at the end of the book, John's messaging of peace and everything he brought to the table really speaks to us in a deeper level right up till now, right? We're in 2023 and lots of things he said are still quite relevant, right? So I leave you guys with this thought. Thank you, John, for everything you did regarding activism and civil rights and fighting for the little guys, right? That's what he tried to do, and I think he succeeded, right? And shame on the politicians, shame on Nixon, who blew something that just meant to be perfect, right? See you later, guys. Thanks for coming.